mature audience. These are all seniors, you said, Taylor?
No, it's some ninth graders, a lot of 10th graders, a few juniors and seniors.
At this age, it's good to overestimate. My name is Jim Umhoefer from Sauk Center. I'm with the Sinclair Lewis Foundation. We sponsor the Sinclair Lewis Writers Conference, which is tomorrow, our 33rd annual. I'm interested in writing myself. I'd like to introduce Danny Klecko, a baker who likes to write, and Julie, who started out as a writer and editor and publisher. At the end of the last hour, we started to delve into the question of, at this age, like we all were a long time ago, how do you get started? 2 reasons to write. You write for yourself, which is great, or you try to write for other people. If your goal is to get some of your poetry, your stories out into the world, publishing online or in print, how does that happen? I want to start, Julie, because you must have a similar background. When you started out writing first before you got interested?
I did. Mm-hmm.
So can you tell a little about your path from high school students to where you are now in the literary world?
Sure. Thanks.
Well, I started, I mentioned earlier too, in high school, loving to write, being a big fan of English class, was the editor of the yearbook. But then when I got into my 20s, I really realized that writing, I went to college, got an English degree, French degree, but I realized that I really wanted to be a writer, and the time was right for me to just try. And so it is, I started, I think I mentioned earlier, with a community newspaper. I live in West St. Paul, which is right over the border of St. Paul. And I was covering things like, city council meetings and people starting new businesses or teachers and schools. And, on the surface, nothing, doesn't seem like that exciting or intriguing. But what I was doing was I was developing the craft of being a writer for publication. And then I sort of moved along the line in terms of the size of publications I was writing for. I was a columnist for 2 or 3 different publications. I got onto the family beat because I had 2 children at that point then, and that was lucrative, and I was busy, and there was a lot. I was learning a lot about writing. I was learning a lot about families. It was beneficial to me. But I do think that just the more you write, the more different kinds of stories that you can write, the better you're going to be as a writer. And I think that one of the questions that we were talking about earlier too is we talked about getting your thoughts on paper, starting. Where do you start? But then being vulnerable enough to show your writing to your sister, your friend, your mom, your teacher, your dad. And it's hard because then they'll read it and they'll think, well, do you really need this? Do you really need that? And you're like, yes, I know. I need every single word that's there. You have to let go of that. I'm still that way. And I think that is an important part. You're growing as a writer, you're growing as an observer, you're growing as an editor for yourself so that you can work well with editors outside in all these different publications that you're interested in.
We're a little bit different than Julie, because our backgrounds are different. And I know some of you were here, so I'll just kind of take you down a new avenue. 1976, I started 7th grade, Carl Sanford Junior High, and it was the first year ever that it was mandatory for boys to have to take home ec and girls had to take industrial arts. And oftentimes the men in our neighborhood, would use innuendo to tell us, make sure you don't encourage your teachers to keep you in these home ec classes. But I'll tell you, 6th period, Miss Williams taught me how to make apple crisp, and I've been in the kitchen ever since. And I dedicated my first book of poetry to her. But in terms of writing, unlike Julie, I was thrilled when people told me what to do. When they would say, this is bad, this is wrong, because I wanted to get better. I didn't have the formal education that she had. And I'll tell you what I did. I've always enjoyed being with women. And I would write poems to women. I'd write short stories to women and things like this. And it was an interesting way to, not only express what my intentions were, but to get better at using language. Julie, in the first session, used the word language quite a bit. And language is more than just words. It's about using cadence. It's about using sound. It's about using, when you're reading them out loud, pitch, tone, different things like that. So anyways, just for those of you who, I don't know if we have any people who struggle academically as I did, or maybe people who, I wasn't the A or B student by any means, but I have been able to, through confidence and surround yourself with smart people, bring a product into a world that's looking for things that are in demand. Jim, tell us a little bit more about maybe your educational process and how you, when you were this age, how you got to your esteemed position today.
Thank you. First, I'd like to preface this by saying everybody in this room has a story that's unique to somebody else. You either have an uncle and aunts, grandparents, a cultural background, some experience of yours, some place you've been that nobody else has. And there are places that if you want to, people might be interested in reading that. It could be the local paper, it could be a student newspaper, it could be something online. So the short answer is yes, everybody in here that really wants to and sticks with it has a chance to get the word out. Doesn't mean you're going to get wealthy with it. I think if you talk to Danny and to Julie, if you picture a pyramid, Stephen King and those writers are on the top, there's a whole raft of people that do not make a full-time living as a writer. That being said, I was telling Nina before that I knew I was going to be a writer back in 4th grade. I have a confession to make. I plagiarized my mom. I came home in 4th grade and the teacher said, write a poem about winter. I came home and said, Mom, I got to write a poem about winter. I don't want to write a poem about winter. She was quick with language. She whips out right away. I like winter's ice and snow. When sliding and skating we can go. But winter's days are not so nice when we shovel snow and fall on ice. Now, I'm 7 years old and I was back in 4th grade, 10 years old, so this poem still sticks with me. I wrote that, put my name on it. I got 4 stars at the bulletin board. Hey, that's my first published piece and I plagiarized it. So don't plagiarize. But the other thing is, we mentioned in the first session, persistence sometimes is more important than talent. If you have it in your heart that you want to share your poems, your stories, some angle of your writing with other people, there are ways to do that. Danny did it a little bit different way. Danny is a promoter, and I mean that in a positive sense. He's got a knack for getting his work out and not asking people permission. Do you want to see my stuff? He sets them up as a little competition. I'm available. Who wants to get my stuff? So it's a little bit, I got a lot of respect for that kind of thinking, Danny. And like you say, you fake it till you make it. There's a certain degree of truth to that. You don't have to know everything. You don't even have to know everything about yourself. You got to be willing to take a risk and realize that if somebody says no, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. But Julie, I want to go back to you for a second. If somebody here wanted to, how would they approach you if they had, say, a poem they wanted to write, or a story about maybe an ethnic or cultural background, or a human interest family thing? How do people approach you with an idea?
Well, I would say, it's usually a good idea. We have, what we instituted at Next Avenue is a pitch form. It sort of levels the playing field. So people could just tell us a little bit about themselves. So that's what you would do. I was the editor of my yearbook. I was on the student newspaper in college, whatever. And, this is the kind of writing I like to do. Here's some samples. That's helpful if you're just breaking in, if you're starting in whatever field, magazines, journals, online. Here's what I've done other places. Or here's what I've done. I mean, if you're a poet and you haven't been published, here's one of my poems. I will say, too, I think that this is something, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, too, the publication that I'm the editor for we are focused on issues for people 50 and older. But the other thing we're really, really trying to focus on more strongly is an intergenerational conversation. We have a lot of writers who are younger, to be honest. I have 2 of my staff members who are quite a bit younger. And I think in this world, all generations can't segment themselves. We all have to be in this together. So if you are interested in writing about your grandparents, or if you are interested in, I don't know, just some kind of event you've gone to that isn't necessarily for your age group, but for another, a lot of publications are really interested in that. We want the voice of younger people that are coming up into the world. That's really important. So,
I just wanted to chime in that I agree with everything Julie said. I was very fortunate. My mentor, my poetry mentor, was the late Carol Conley. She's the only poet laureate that St. Paul ever had. And she used to tell me, Danny, you have to be brave enough to conform. And so I've never forgot that. However, when Julie's telling you all the things that to do, I mean, she's probably right, but I never do it that way. There's what's the old expression? I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission. So for me, I remember last February during the Super Bowl, I had my first poem published in the New York Times. And I imagine they get thousands of entries, for this every week. But what I did is I didn't even use their computer format. I got like crinkled paper and wrote with my scribble and put it in an envelope and sent it. And I gave the number to my publisher, not even to me. And then they called her and were asking her, why isn't this guy following the rules? Why can't he do it? And she said, he doesn't have a computer. And the guy Googled me and said, he's a writer. What do you mean he doesn't have a computer? And right there it started. So she gave my phone number. The editor of the New York Times called me up and said, I've always wanted to, do the Twin Cities because I used to be in a band and I liked the 90s music, which, you guys are old enough to know this. That was the Replacements era. So knowing that that's who he liked, I made some comment, I hope it wasn't them, and I named a different band. So I was kind of poking him and making fun of him a little bit. We're best friends now. The guy, has gone on to publish further poems or whatever, but, one of the things you have to remember in relationships, in business, in literature, and everything, when you're trying to get something from a person who allocates resource, they've heard the same pitch day in, day out. Julie hears the same thing day after day, and it's all like white noise. But when you get someone who uses a creative way to ask for what they want and is polite and says please and thank you, sometimes that's just enough. But anyways, Jim, any thoughts?
Those of you that like to write, nobody's going to knock on your door and say, can I see something you're writing? So the step and the risk is to put yourself out there and show it to somebody. And I would give a challenge here because I know from my background, from the background of this central Minnesota agricultural-based town, the different cultures that we have here, we're very lucky. There's stories that people in this room have that the local newspapers would be interested in. Farming culture, for example, maybe from a Hispanic background. Farming culture from multi-generations, just as some examples. So interesting stories in your life. All the local newspapers are under a consortium based in Sauk Centre. They are looking for human interest stories. And they don't care how old you are. They don't care if you have a high school diploma or a college diploma in writing. Who cares? Their question is, can you tell a story that people want to read? I mentioned this the last time. There's 4 ingredients that I put in all my stories. Vision, compassion, introspection, wisdom. Basically, what do you see? What do you feel? Why would people care about reading it? What are the options? What are the details? And in my case, since I do travel writing, how do people duplicate a trip? See, feel, think, and act. That's just one way to look at the world. but I know there's people in this room that have expressed some interest in writing, maybe have some questions. Who had a question that we didn't get to before? Raise your hand. No, if you're gonna get out there with your publishing, and you got a question, get it out there. Questions, comments, yes?
When you're going up to an editor, do you have, like, when you show them, do you have to wait until you show another editor your stuff?
Well, that's a good question.
That's a good
question is,
question.
if you want to approach an editor with a proposal or a query or a pitch, do you have to wait till that editor answers the question before you approach another editor?
I'll take that one.
Well, I'm going to let you take it, but I'm just going to, because there's always different perspectives on it. I'm pretty sure I know what Julie's going to say. But, you know, it's interesting, when I decided to launch, as I said earlier, it was interesting when I put it out, there was a food editor who I asked for their help at the Pioneer Press. And City Pages picked up my story before the Pioneer Press did, and we went with it, and then the Pioneer Press person got mad, and they never talked to me again. They were in the paper for another 8-9 years before they retired. So it can sever relationships. But I got City Pages, so, you know, I mean, it's plus or minus. Julie, what is the real way we're supposed to do this?
What is the real way?
That is actually is the way. I mean, it's called, so in the business, it's called simultaneous submissions. And so you were not hiding the fact that you were sending your story to other places. Yeah, don't hide the fact. Just say, I'm submitting this. You don't have to say where, but just say I'm submitting this to other publications. And I will get that. I just got one today. I was reading earlier this morning. Somebody sent a pitch, because what they're doing is saying, I want to get this published. I know your process is a little bit slow. It actually isn't. I mean, we turn pitches around pretty quickly. Just for that reason, I don't want to keep writers waiting. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be waiting for somebody to say yes or no, I'm going to run your story in the paper. So if you announce it right up front, and then I've also had people come back to me and say, oh, somebody else picked that up. Fine, that's awesome, good for you, good luck, and a lot of times I'll turn down pitches too. I will say this isn't quite right for us, but good luck placing it someplace else. I really want people to find the right spot for their story. One other thing I want to add to what Jim said too, if you don't mind. When you were talking about finding stories out in the community, we have one of our editors at Next Avenue lives in New York. He's been in the newspaper business for years. He's like a business writer, and he was on the staff of the Los Angeles Times when they won a Pulitzer Prize for the Rodney King beating many years ago. Anyway, so we'll get these pitches sometimes. We go through them as a group, and we'll see one and we'll think, what is this? And he'll say, and this seems old-fashioned, but you guys, it's true. He'll be like, that's a Hey Martha story. And we're like, what is a Hey Martha story? A Hey Martha story, or insert other name here. Hey Michaela, whatever. It's something that you think someone else should read. So if you wrote a story about a farmer here in town, and maybe their son, they're in business together, somebody else says, hey, you know what, to whoever they're sitting with, hey, I just read this really great story, you should read it. That's how people recognize your name, and that's how your career takes off. Do you have a question? Yes. Who's it for? Go ahead.
So when you're talking to a publisher or editor, do you have to just give them a prompt, or can you give them a story, or like give them the idea of a story you've already written, and if they get back to you, just give them that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Oh, yes. What's your name? What's your name?
Asher?
Asher. Okay. She was asking, when you give a pitch for a story, do you just give the sort of the kernel, the idea to the editor, or do you send the whole thing? It depends on what it is, to be honest with you. Like, for example, I'm gonna carry through this metaphor of writing for a local newspaper. You would say, I have this idea, I know this farmer and his son, they're starting this new business as part of their farm. And you give some of the details. And if you have talked to them and say, I know that they will talk to me, I know they'll do an interview with me, the more information you can get, then the editor will be interested and will want to talk to you further. So I always, with essays, that's a little bit different. A lot of people send their entire essays to us. which is sometimes good, sometimes not. But if you're going to do a reported story, if you're going to do a journalistic kind of story, you don't do the work until it's been assigned to you, too. You know what I'm saying? Did I answer your question?
Kind of, but if it's like a fictional story that you want to be published, would you have that already written and then submit the idea to publishers?
Yeah, and then if they turned around and said, we'd like to see more, then 10 minutes later you could send it to them. So yeah, I think so. I think if that's the kind of writing you're talking about, yes. I wouldn't send it off all at once though, because, right, yeah.
One of the things too that I wanted to talk about, I mean, do we still have speech class or oral communications? Is that taught here?
Some of the classes have specific units, but we do have a college public speaking class and a speech.
Because, and once again, told you already, I wasn't a great student, but because I struggled socially as a youth, my counselors forced me to take oral communications. I mean, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, all the way through, right? And it's probably the most helpful thing because you can write better when you speak better. There's always a better word to be used than the ones that we select, is what was taught to us in oral communications. And I'll tell you, I have spent decades seeing some of the more successful writers across the country giving presentations, and it's amazing to me how a lot of them aren't very good behind a podium. And so even if you're a marginal writer, but you know how to speak, it's going to push you to the front of the line. People like to listen to people who know how to represent themselves, to have clear ideas, to be concise. I mean, I've never asked Jim this, but Jim, I'm going to guess you've taken some training in public speaking, have you?
No, I just kissed the Glorious Stone in Ireland. That's all I had to do.
Well, there you go. There is that.
You were going to finish the thought out?
No, I was just kind of curious.
I want to get back to the question about how do you approach editors. There's different ways for small periodicals, online or in print, stories versus books. And there's a way that you can learn the business part of it. If you have never been published and you're new in the field, you don't want an editor to say, this person has never been published and new in the field. There's a publication called Writer's Digest, and there's other tools online that tell you specifics. How do you query? How do you pitch? How do you do the business part of it? Find out that stuff first and follow those conventions. Julie spoke last time that they get hundreds of submissions, a minority of which are published. How are you going to make your pitch or query stand out from the other ones? So you can do a little research, do your homework ahead of time. Like I say, no one's going to knock on your door and say, hey, can you write me a story? So remove the barriers to your own success by doing the research on how the business works. And then, if you feel passionate about it, wild horses will not drag you away from what you want to write, whether it's for yourself or whether it's for other people. And you use that foundation and you just keep at it. I can see both in Danny and Julie's case that they've done it in their particular ways, that no matter the circuitous route their life and their profession has taken, they do not give up. I guess that's the end of that thought. Any other question here before we turn back to these other folks? Teachers, any other question?
There are 2 minutes.
No, go ahead. Yes, please.
Oh, how do you write without comparing yourself to others? Like, how do I write essays without comparing myself to like someone like Didion or something?
I want to paraphrase that. I don't know if I've got this right. How do you write without comparing yourself to others? Like in essays or poetry? Is that what you want to ask? Danny, why don't you start with that?
Do you like Didion?
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll tell you, I compare myself all the time. I live across the street. I live in a mansion, kitty corner from F. Scott Fitzgerald. I let everyone know about it. And does that make me F. Scott Fitzgerald? No, but it's an icebreaker. And it gives people, especially if you live in St. Paul, Julie's family her grandparents moved into that house when the Fitzgeralds left. St. Paul's kind of a unique city, but oftentimes when people do know your interest palette, so to speak, I think that it's beneficial. The work in itself is always going to be defined. I mean, it's either good or it's bad, or it either makes a connection to somebody at the editor's office or it doesn't. But I don't think you have to worry about doing that, because oftentimes what Julie's trying to do, she's involved in a business, and they're going to try to hit certain demographics. We were having a conversation the other day about a piece that was pitched about Beyonce, and how that checked a lot of different boxes or whatever. But Julie, what's your response?
I would say that's a really good question, and I think it's hard not to compare yourself to other people. I don't think anybody can just say, oh, don't do that, because you will. And the Joan Didions of the world are in rarefied air.
She loves Didion.
I love Joan Didion. I love Joan Didion. I love essayists. I love Alice Munro. I love, it's a bar that is very hard to achieve. But I think it's back to be authentic, be who you are, like Danny was saying too. Find what your voice is. That's the thing. Your voice is 110% different than whatever Joan Didion's ever was. And everybody's story is 110% different from everybody else's. And so if you're able to communicate your personal perspective in whatever you're writing, that's good enough. It doesn't matter what other people do. It's good enough that you can do it. And that's the kind of thing that really shines through in great personal writing. I think if I can say, I see who this person is, I see what this story is, that's the best. That's the best, I think.
And just real quick, Julie, I want to set you back up. When you're talking about pitching, when you're going to TPT, PBS, whatever, you don't get straight to Julie. She's at the top of her pyramid. So you're going to have to talk to different people or correspond oftentimes with other people. So one of the things I want to encourage you guys to do is make sure you take time to address the people that you're talking to on that route before you get to her. Because oftentimes if you make one connection with them, or if that person that's going to bring you to her, they're going to say, we like this person, or whatever. And sometimes are you influenced by people that are in that process?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And also I think we kind of glossed over an important topic earlier about saying thank you and being grateful. And it's a two-way street. So every morning we publish 4 stories, and I'm the one that sets them up on the site. And if it's an editor or a writer that's worked for me, first thing, 7 o'clock in the morning, I send them a link to their story. I tell them it's going to be on Facebook. We're going to put it in our newsletter. Thank you very much. I think this is going to do really well with readers. If it's someone whose work I like, I'll say, I hope we hear from you again. If it's someone whose work I'm like, I'll just say thank you very much. But then a lot of times, people will come back, thank you. It means a lot to me to have been published here. We hear that a lot. We hear that a lot from people. So the gratitude, it sounds kind of weird, and it takes literally 2 seconds to say thank you. So that's how you build relationships. Do you have a question too, right?
Yes. It's kind of like a lot of questions in one.
Sure.
So say I wanted to go into publishing.
Mm-hmm.
Would I have to join a firm right away, or could I make my own firm? And if you made your own publishing firm, how would you go about contacting people to help with that?
To submit manuscripts to you? Is that what you're like?
Like how would you contact printing companies to advertise?
Oh,
editors?
Yeah, all of that, yeah. I guess I would advise to have some sort of background in the writing field or the editing field. But like I was saying earlier, when I started the Paris Morning Publishing, I didn't know about book publishing. So yeah, definitely trial by fire, and you learn what works. So you just make connections, say who you are, say what you're doing, and then people come on board.
Well, in Ingram, you know.
That was a whole thing. Yeah, like how to get the books actually printed. Yeah, you do, you learn a lot. But I think so to your question, you don't have to join an association or a guild or anything like that. I would say if you're truly interested, you know, there are different publishing, in Minnesota, there are different publishing organizations. They often have like virtual presentations that are free. Anybody can watch those. Or if there are events that you can go to, just to kind of hear from the people that are already doing it. That would probably be my advice. Find out who's doing it, and if there's someone whose story was interesting to you, find them online. It'll take you 3 minutes, and send them an email and say, I saw this presentation you did about publishing books about dogs or whatever. And then a lot of times people are really willing to share their information. I think most times people are willing to share their information, especially with the next generation, like I was talking about before, of journalists coming up. It's super important. It's super important. New voices need to be added to the mix. That's just full stop.
I want to come back to how important it is to respect the editor's time or whoever you are pitching to. They are overwhelmed, and you want to stand out as professional, and that you understand who her readers are, or who looks at the online TPT. One way I've done that is by looking at the ads. Who sponsors
That's a good point.
the
Yeah, that's a good
publication? Is it Jaguars, Mercedes, Rolls Royces, or is it Chevrolet? That tells you who are they aiming at. The advertisers spend their money in a wise way, so they know their clientele. So if you want to find out the demographics of who reads or looks at something, look at who's buying the ads. And that kind of gives an idea of maybe an education level of a reader. Also with your pitch, it's hard to write short. I was misquoting, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln, who wrote a 14-page letter or something like that to a friend. I'm sorry, he said, I didn't have time to make it shorter. If you're looking at economy of language, you look at somebody like Dan Klecko, or somebody that writes song lyrics and poetry. That has the most power and punch in few words for emotions than any prose. So thinking that way in your pitch, short and sweet. Back in the paper era, even today, I keep my pitches and queries less than a page long. If I can't get an editor's attention right now, in less than a page, they're not going to take a look at it. It's 2 pages. They don't have time. So that's just part of the business part about it and part of the background research.
And another thing too, it's interesting, like once you get into the publishing world or the literary world, you know, all too often, you know, industries tend to, all the players do things the same. But oftentimes with my bio, when I submit a bio, too many writers, publishers, whatever, will all have all the academics listed, every award they've won or whatever. I found to what Jim's saying, less is more. I'll pick out 2 or 3 things about me or my work that are super interesting. That's all these people want when you send it to them, is something a little bit unique that says that you're authentic. But I think another thing when you're talking about these pitches, younger writers, not always younger, but sometimes inexperienced writers, a lot of adjectives, a lot of extra description. I mean, if you, you know, read Ernest Hemingway, if you like to read books, few people use less words than Hemingway. You don't have to like him as a person, but his training came from the Kansas City Star. He's a newspaper person. So journalism, writers, you know, are the pinnacle of where you want to learn the trade. But in terms of pitches, short.
Yes, definitely. And the other thing is familiarize yourself with wherever you want to write, whatever kind of site you want to write for, whatever. That's something that is, that's a stumbling block for us in our work. We'll get pitches that there was a similar story like 3 weeks ago. You know, spend an hour looking through, if you wanted to write for Minnesota Monthly, which is a magazine in the Twin Cities, spend an hour on their website. And if you have an idea in mind, in the search bar, you know, chai tea in the Twin Cities, If they haven't written about it, they might be looking for it. But if you put that in and there's 6 stories that come up, move on to the next idea. So I think that also, it's a respectful way to be professional to say, I have a great idea, but let me make sure that you haven't already covered this because it's going to waste your time. You know what I mean? But short pitches are really important, not too short, but short enough to give a sense of what you want to do, give a sense of the story that you want to tell, and make the editor want to know more.
And a person will do that without telling the editor what to see or think. If you start out your pitch by saying, you're going to love this story, this is the funniest thing, the best human interest, the editor will be rejected that. If it's true. You also don't want to say to people, well, you might not like this, but I do. You know, so you don't have to apologize for what you're pitching, and you don't need to tell other people what to think about it. Let your work stand on its own.
That's true.
So Julie, I'm kind of curious with all the stories that you come in. My Joan Didion friend here, is there more of a skew towards positivity? I mean, I know sometimes, we live in a world that has a range of interests, but will most publications go for something that's a positive story as opposed to one that's cynical? In politics, you can go either way on that. You know where I'm going.
Yeah, absolutely. We have had a story on our site about a month ago that's called "What is Happiness Anyway?" And it's by a psychologist that lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He's written for us a lot. That was the headline that we came up with, "What is happiness anyway?" And it's just different ways to be happy and what it's not, and how people are worried. I'm not as happy as I should be. What's wrong? And, it's just like everybody in this room probably wants the answer to that question, and there is not an answer. So I think positivity, giving something to someone, something to think about, that lifts their spirits, because there's a lot of things in life, in the world, that doesn't lift your spirits. And I think that the more positive you can be in your writing, if that's what you're interested in, or in your life, or obviously, I think that goes a long way. And to Jim's point, yeah, that's kind of a pet peeve. Don't tell editors you're going to love this. Don't do that because we might, could be right, but let's let editors form their own opinions. And so, yeah.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah.
Something else, a burning question. How much do writers earn? Anything else? You need a college education. Who's got a question? Yes.
How do you hire an illustrator for the cover of your story?
Repeat the question.
How do you acquire an illustrator for the cover of your story? That's Julie's.
Yeah. That's a really great question. So on the site I work for, we use photographs, and a lot of them are from Getty Images, which are, those are available all over. Sometimes people will submit their own photos. For the books, I have the good fortune to work with a young designer. Her name is Audrey Campbell. She's based in Minneapolis, and I had a conversation with her when Klecko's first book was ready, Hitman, Baker, Casket Maker. And she obviously knew he was a baker, and she came up with a great cover. It's just a pink cake on a white background. It's that simple. And she's gone on to do all the books for us, all 5 books. She did, so she's done 5. Well, actually, she's done 6 because she's done the next one. I think finding illustrators, it's a network thing. If you know someone that's good at art. Nowadays so much can be done with Adobe Images, like all of that kind of stuff. But they have to have have a good kernel of an idea and be willing to give you a few samples, because you might not like the first thing, but I like that part of it. I like seeing the word part, the language part is where my heart really is, but to see the illustrations and that matters a lot to me too. So I think networking, I think that's a good way to do it. Find people that, depending on what you want to do, friends of yours that are good you know, in any kind of art, I think that's important. So just make connections with others.
Can I comment on that?
Please do.
Let me ask you guys, what is the purpose? What is the job of a book cover? What is that book cover supposed to do? Anyone?
Sell you the book.
What's that?
Sell you the book.
What do you have to do before you sell the book? I'm not being a wise guy. Yeah? What's that? Catch your eye. You're before and you're after. The job of the book cover is for you to put the book in your hands. It's going to force you to pick it up. And I know a lot of people buy online, but independent bookstore sales are bigger than they've ever been. So when Julie talks about my first book, which, you know, not to be that guy, but it won some pretty big awards. It beat out all the Big Ten college professors for poetry. It was a big success. It was featured in the Washington Post. But I was very certain, because I go to an independent bookstore 5 days a week, and I just scour and I look at everything, what's coming out, I look at the tables. And it's interesting how the industry, just like food, all too often everything copies each other. So when the designer gave her the book cover with that pink cake, the thing that was happening back then was everything was pastels, canary yellow, mauve, pinks, things like this. So what I said, let's put a white background behind the pink cake, because nobody uses white book covers. Not only did that cake pop, but when you looked at a table with 42 other books, as oftentimes is the case, this one was different. And sometimes if it's just different enough, a person will put it in their hands. So I'm always a big fan of not worrying about the content or if it's gonna get the story across. I don't care. I just want a person to look at something and be able to touch it. Jim?
In my travel writing and photography, I'm a vagabond that likes to write and take pictures. That combination has served me very well. Back to your question about illustrating, I can solve an editor's problems if I can convince that person that not only can I tell a story within, if the editor says 1,000 words, they don't mean 1,100, they don't mean 900, they mean 1,000 words. I can also illustrate that, and an image will help to sell a story. I am not the world's best photographer or writer by any stretch, but I am one persistent SOB. I do not give up on that, and I will still pitch my stuff, and if they say no, that's okay. But I've been lucky enough to illustrate my own work. Otherwise, publications like National Geographic or Smithsonian might still be the top of the line for that type of piece. They tend to hire separate. Somebody writes the story and somebody does the photography. But usually the publisher will find the illustrator. Yes, Taylor?
Just getting a 3-minute warning.
We got 3 minutes, so any last stories?
I just real quick, you know, the one thing, once again, in literary, especially literary, but in all forms of life, I'll tell you the one thing that I've been lucky enough to know these two, that we share in common, more so than words or literature, it's confidence. So when you're going into these careers and you're doing this, if you're confident, and it's a balance, you don't want to be overconfident, but you want these people to realize that you're a professional. If you ask, or if you say, I'm not sure, what do you think, during a pitch, it's over. You want to, these people are so important and they have so much going on in their day-to-day, so my job is to make sure they know I'm going to do everything and they're not going to have to handle me. I'm going to get it done. So, but the clock is winding down. Jim, do you want to represent us and say our thank yous?
Julie, did you have any last comments?
Oh, sure, one
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to, again, reinforce the idea, the word authentic, obviously you've heard it a lot today, that's important. And your question about comparing yourself to others, I think when you're just starting out in a career or in an avocation, what you want to do, just be who you are and be confident in it, and that'll come through, that'll transcend. And I think that I am sure there are readers in this room because you raised your hand, and I'm sure there are writers here too, and I just really encourage you, if it's what you want to do, there are ways to do it. So I hope you will. And also make a pitch for newspaper, school yearbook.
Team, guys. Media team.
It's media team, you guys. Do that. I mean, because then the other thing is then you're with like-minded folks and you get to bounce ideas off of each other, which is really important. Okay, I'm being pulled off the stage.
Thank you. This has been a great group, and thank you to Taylor and Tracy for encouraging this and giving us a chance to talk about something that we're passionate about. Anything else, Taylor?
We're good. If you guys have to get to the bus, you can go in the bell rings. Otherwise, you can do the
No, it was great. What a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, it was fun.
Ah,